Hey guys, my name is Haley and today I'm going to be filming my November wrap up, and I normally just do the least favorite to favorite and then do DNFs at the end, but quite frankly I just read half of it was Doctor Who stuff, so I'll do that in the second half and then do everything else beforehand in case you don't care about the Doctor Who. I know not everybody here cares about Doctor Who, but I'm gonna talk about it because this is my channel, so yeah. Also, there were a lot of books that I read, so let's get right on into it. So the first book that I read this month, I don't know why I say the first book, I don't read these in order. So the first one I'm going to talk about is The End of October by someone I don't even remember. And I gave this 3 stars apparently on Goodreads, but quite frankly I read this at the very beginning of the month and I cannot remember a single thing about it other than that vaguely the concept was really interesting. It was basically a virus takes over the world and the country's government flops and handles it badly and it kind of destroys the country. So if you live in the US, that might sound familiar, which is why I wanted to read this. But while the science parts were really interesting, the characters, couldn't tell you who any of these characters were. The writing, I think it was the writing, a combination of the writing and the audiobook narrator, was so dry. There were times I would zone out and I would be like, I don't know what's happening, and they weren't even the sciencey bits. But so this is probably closer to a 2.5, 2.75, but yeah, this was fine. The concept was really interesting, so I will give it that. And then I want to talk about One by One by Ruth Ware. This book is so polarizing and people either absolutely really like it and think it's a good book, or hate it. Hate it 1 star, never want to see it again, angry at Ruth Ware. And I'm like, whoa. So I went into this knowing that you should not treat it as a good mystery and just view it as a book that happens to have a small mystery. And I think that's the best way to go into it, because if this book was a mystery and you were rating it on the mystery, it's a 2 star, maybe 1.75. The mystery is not hard to figure out. You will know who the killer is very, very early on in this book, which I did and guessed correctly because I've read a lot of mystery. But even if you haven't, I feel like it's very obvious who the killer is. But as a book, and the way that the tension is built and the way they talk about their app and all of the characters being rounded up and rounded off and understanding who everyone is, it's a good book. So I gave it a 3.5 stars, probably closer to a 3.75, not quite a 4 in my brain, but it was a good book and it was also a very good audiobook. So I do recommend the audio for this if you are able to get it. Then I had May I Have Your Attention Please by James Corden. James Corden, if you didn't know, is a comedian. He's also an actor, and I know him from Doctor Who. I know a lot of his his just comedy in general. He's very funny. I think he's probably one of my favorite comedic people that exists because I think he's hilarious. His show, The Late Late Show, he was really famous for Carpool Karaoke, and this, I was expecting this to be much funnier than it was knowing James Corden, but it was really just him talking about how he got into acting, how he found out he wanted to be in theater, and then how he went to movies from there, and it follows a very sort of messy part of his life and him reflecting on it and things he wish he hadn't have done, which I was not expecting it to get that serious because this is James Corden. But so I gave this 3.5 stars. Again, expected it to be funnier, but I do think I have a better well-rounded idea of who he is and how he got to where he is now as a person. Next up we have Anxious People by Frederick Bachman. This I gave a 3.75 stars. I thought the way he weaved the characters together was really interesting, but quite frankly this is probably the least memorable of all of Frederick Bachman's books in my brain, and I read it the most recently. Normally his books take on a rather serious topic and barrel into it with a bunch of really, really well-written quotes, and this felt more like a comedic thing that happened to have some serious subjects sprinkled throughout, which was interesting. It almost felt like a closed circle mystery. Is that what those are called? It felt like there was a mystery going on and it wasn't that serious and shouldn't be taken that seriously, but there were serious moments. So I gave it 3.75 stars. Not my favorite Bachman, but I'm glad that I read it. And then, because I've been looking for a COVID, biography, memoir, non-fiction, basically, of people talking about COVID, but it's so recent, it's not that recent now. We're what, 9-10 months into it? Is that right? No, 8, 9, something like that. And I just that's not long enough in my brain for us to be able to, like, for people to be able to write books on it. So I wanted something that had started at the beginning. So this is called Wuhan Diary. So it is set in Wuhan, China, where the outbreak started, and it is exactly what it sounds like. It's a diary of someone who used to put their posts up online, and she was chronicling her perspective on what was going on in Wuhan for those first, I think, 90 days, something like that, and how they were on extreme hard lockdown, like nobody was allowed outside and there were so many restrictions and all of that. And she is an older woman, so like she obviously was high risk. Even if she hadn't been on such an extreme lockdown, she probably would have locked herself down because she was so high risk. And it was really interesting seeing the way that Wuhan's government handled this, because at first they also were like, oh, it's not that serious, and then they were like, crap, it's really serious. So I really liked getting her perspective as someone who is high risk and older and has trouble doing life things anyway because she's an older lady. So I really enjoyed this. I do recommend it if you can get your hands on it. The audiobook was much longer than I expected it to be. I don't know if like the page count on Goodreads is just wrong because it said it was like 200 pages. It's not. This is like a relatively long-ish audiobook. So yeah, I'll probably buy this in a hardcover when it comes out because I really, really did like it a lot, and I gave it 4 stars. And then here's a book that I forgot to even leave in my other wrap-up last month, even though I read it at the very end. I think like the day I filmed my wrap-up I had finished it, and that's why I forgot to put it in the video. And that is Peace Talks by Jim Butcher. This is book 15 question mark? 15, 16? Somewhere in there of the Dresden Files. I'm almost caught up on the Dresden Files. I have one more book to read and then I'll be caught up, which is insane to me because I've been reading that series for like a relatively long time, but there's so many books that I didn't think I would catch up this fast. But I really enjoyed this. I love the direction this series is taking. I love Harry Dresden so much. He's such an interesting character, and he's honestly what keeps me going, but I also adore a ton of these side characters, so I can't talk about this. It's book 15 in a series, but I gave it 4.25 stars. Next up is one that surprised me so much because I literally knew little to nothing about it going into it, and I thought for some reason that it was a thriller. I don't even know who I heard that from or why, but I picked it up with like zero information basically. And the first 2 chapters of this audiobook, I literally almost DNF'd it because it was just like content matter I don't like to read about, and having it read to me on audio, I was like, don't like that. But once it got through that little portion, I think it helped that I was like, I think I was cleaning my room or like reorganizing shelves or something while I was listening to it while I was busy. So I just kind of let it play, and then it slowly started to catch my attention like the further into the book that we got, and then it hit a point where I was like, oh, this isn't a thriller at all. This is not a mystery. This is not a thriller. It's not even a horror. And I don't even want to tell you what the genre actually is. 1, because it's genre bending, and 2, because the turn it took was so unexpected that I was floored and immediately like texted Kate and was like, you need to read this. I'm not going to tell you what it's about, but you need to read this. And she was like, what? So she did enjoy this a little bit more than I did, so spoiler for her wrap up, but I gave this a 4.25 stars. It was very interesting. It's very well written. It's very short and packed a huge punch in like the short amount of time that it had to tell its story. Then I picked up Biden's old memoir called Promise Me Dad. This made me love Joe Biden so much. Like, I already really liked the man. Like, I knew about him a lot because of pop culture when Obama was in office and he was the vice president. But now that he is our president, I was like, okay, I need to learn like more about this man. So I decided to read his memoir. This is basically about his son. It's not necessarily about like politics. Like, there are some politics, but it's not necessarily about like politics and his time in the White House. It's more like talking about his relationship with his family and his son, and like a little bit about his relationship with Obama. But this was so good. Like, it's really well written. It explains his relationships with other people really well. It gave me a really good perspective on what kind of person he is. Like, I did not know he was Catholic and that he has like a relatively strong faith, and like he would go to church services and stuff to like support people. Like, there was a church shooting back when Obama was in office, and Biden went and gave a eulogy for the guy who died, and like It was a whole thing that like brought me to tears. And I gave this a 4.75 stars only because there were like 2 or 3 like very military based chapters that I just do not understand military warfare and do not like to like listen or read it, so that's why there was a slight star docking. But I love this. If you haven't read this and you don't know anything about Biden and want to know more about him, I highly recommend. And then my favorite book of the month, and probably one of my favorite books of all time, and this is the book that made me go, maybe I should do a favorite nonfiction separate from my favorite fiction books of the year, which I don't think I've ever done before, but I've actually read a lot, like a decent amount of really good nonfiction this year, and that is Know My Name by Chanel Miller. This is the memoir of the girl who was raped by Brock Turner and went through all of those court cases, and her identity was protected during the court cases while they were happening, so nobody knew who she was. And obviously, if you know anything about the Brock Turner case, he got out of jail after 2 months because his family is rich, which angers everyone. And this is the most like infuriating and yet well explained document of a court case I've ever been involved in, and Chanel's story broke my heart. Like, and she also is like a very strong individual, and like goes on a whole tangent at the end of this about how like she shouldn't have been blamed for this, which obviously she should not have. And if you have not read this, please read it. I will be screaming at like every woman that I ever meet to read this book, because it's so important. If you really want to understand like women and you are a man, read this book. You will understand like what a lot of women go through when it comes to men who think they can take whatever they want. Yeah, no, this is the most infuriating book I've probably ever read, and I think that's why I liked it so much. She's also a phenomenal writer. I was not expecting that going into a memoir. Like, I didn't know she was a good writer. And now we're on to the Doctor Who stuff, so bear with me here. I'm going to go on a couple little tangents because I'm very familiar with the Doctor Who world, so I might get into some depth with some of these. I'm going to quickly go through the graphic novels that I read. I basically read the continuation of David's 10th Doctor tales, like bind-up that I read the other month. So I read Volume 5, The Endless Song, which I gave 4 stars. I think I gave all of these 4 stars. Arena of Fear, Sins of the Father, which this one, the second story in here, made me gasp aloud of where they ended up, so I bumped this up a little bit because the first story was fine and then the second one was great, so I enjoyed this one a lot. And then War of Gods, in which also the second story in this one broke my heart because it was so emotional. If you are familiar with David's arc of the Doctor at all, namely season like 4. So yeah, I think this is most of like David's era of the 10th Doctor graphic novels. I think there might be a couple more like one-offs that I will have to find, but I'm mostly pretty much caught up on David's graphic novels. Also, while I was house sitting, I listened to Doctor Who Out of Time, which is a Doctor Who audio adventure. I picked this up because someone I follow on Instagram who's a huge Whovian was saying that the 10th Doctor mentions Rose in a moment of panic, and I was like, sold. So this is a story by the name Out of Time. It is the 10th Doctor meeting a previous incarnation of himself, and it had both of the actors reading it aloud, and it was so much fun. It was about the Daleks. The panic moment of him trying to think of a fake name for himself made me laugh out loud to the point where I had to pause it because I was laughing so hard. So I really enjoyed this. I gave it 4 stars, and I plan to read a lot more Doctor Who audio adventures next year. Next up, I read Doctor Who The Feast of the Drowned. This is a Ten and Rose adventure that I thought reminded me so much of the Capaldi and Clara adventure where they're underwater. I can't think of what it's even called. I wrote it in my review on Goodreads of the exact episodes that it reminds me of. But I really liked this. It's really creepy, like the underwater scenes kind of terrifying. I gave it 3.5 stars. And then I read The Nightmare on Black Island, which is, I like sort of read a lot of these Doctor Who novels out of order because I bought Rose's books first, so hold on, bear with me. But this is actually one of my favorite ones that I've read, like Doctor Who book adventures. This involves like a creepy forest where there's a tons of like creatures of like wild imaginations that like are trying to kill people in the forest so people don't go outside at nighttime, and it was so fun. The Doctor and Rose get separated in this. There's a lot of really cute scenes with them. I was a huge fan of this. I gave this 4.5 stars. And then I listened to The Clockwise Man, which is where I went back in time. I read 2 David Adventures of the novels, and then I went back and read a bunch of Eccleston's. I think I read all of Eccleston's adventures. There were 6 of them. So I listened to The Clockwise Man, which was read by Nicholas Briggs, who, if you're familiar with Doctor Who, he is the voice of the Daleks and the Cybermen and a lot of the villains that involve like crazy voices. So he's really good at imitating vocal inflections, and he did such a good job imitating Christopher Eccleston's northern accent as the 9th Doctor, and I loved it. Even though the story was not my favorite, I think I gave it like a 3.25 star, but Nicholas Briggs made me enjoy this audio so much. Next up was The Monsters Inside. I gave this a 2.75 stars. Camille Coduri reads this, who is Jackie, who is Rose's mom, the actress who plays Rose's mom in the show. She's a really good audiobook narrator, I will give her that. And she narrated actually a couple of the ones that I listened to, but I just, as a personal preference, do not like the Slitheen or anybody from Rex Corpophalopatorius, and that's exactly what this was. Like, I find them to be a very, very, very boring Doctor Who villain. They're just basically just kind of gross, and like they're big monsters, but they're just basically gross. So I gave this 2.75 stars mainly because I do not like this monster and I do not find them interesting. Next up is like in the running for one of my favorite books of Doctor Who that I've read of all time, and that is Winner Takes All. And simply because this felt like an old Russell T Davies episode. Like, that's exactly what it felt like. It was like at home, it was in London, it was in Rose's apartment, it had Mickey, it had Jackie, it had Rose, it had her whole hometown, and I just loved it. I also really liked that they talked about a lot of video game stuff. The whole point of this is that the aliens are using a video game to get to the populace, and it was so fun and so nostalgic, honestly, for old Who, or not even old Who because it is new Who, but the older seasons of the new Who, so like Eccleston's seasons. There was a scene in here that was just so spot on in character for Eccleston's Doctor, of his protectiveness of Rose, so that I was just like, yes, like, yes, all the yes, this is perfectly well characterized, which isn't always the case with the Doctor Who novels, because if you didn't know, they're all written by like different people. Not one person writes the whole series, and like people write multiple ones, but like random ones scattered throughout the books. This one was actually written by Jacqueline Rayner, which she wrote The Stone Rose, which is another 10 Rose adventure that I really, really enjoy. And I basically just loved the feel and atmosphere of this one, plus the video games. I love things that are about video games or like virtual reality. For some reason, that's a book buzzword for me, so I really enjoyed this. I think I gave it a 4.5, but it might be a 4.75 because I keep thinking about it. Then I read The Deviant Strain. I gave this a 3 stars. It's really, like, it's a pretty solid 3 stars. It's nothing special, but I really like that Jack was in this one, Captain Jack Harkness. He's one of my favorite side characters in Doctor Who, so I loved having him there. Then I read Only Human. This one also has Captain Jack in his chapters because he's separated from the Doctor and Rose in this one, and his chapters were so funny because he's like basically been dropped off in the middle of like Earth, and is like, the Doctor goes, hey, take care of this kid, makes sure he gets integrated in society because he was taken out of his time and he can't go back. And it was so funny watching Jack try to take care of this kid for like a month by himself. Time travel aspects of this were also really cool, with like humans who basically have removed their emotions. Always a fun time in Doctor Who. And then I read The Stealers of Dreams, which I also really liked. This one kind of started out okay, and then I bumped it up to a 4.25 stars because there is a point in it where you like basically aren't really sure what is real and what is not real, and it's really hard to tell. Like, they're having a hard time believing anything that they see, and I always find that fascinating if you're not sure what's real of what you're seeing. So yeah, I gave this 4.25 stars. It was a really fun 9 and Rose adventure, and it was a good way to like leave off the 9th Doctor because that was all of his books that exist. So basically we're back in order now with Doctor Who. I read like 2 10 and Rose books, went back and read all the 9 and Rose books, and now am back on 10 and Rose. And we will be continuing in order, hopefully from here. And then we'll talk about my 3 DNFs. If you watched my TBR video, you'll know that I was really excited to read When Dreams Descend. I got like 30% into this because I kept giving it a chance. Like, I knew pretty early on that this was not going to be what I wanted it to be, and I was pretty sure, because it's supposed to be a mix of Moulin Rouge and Phantom of the Opera, which are 2 of my favorite things of all time. And literally it just feels like The Night Circus, which if you've been around here for a while, I do not like The Night Circus. I think it's very boring. I think like it's a cool atmosphere, but the story itself was boring, and that's kind of how this felt. Cool atmosphere, cool idea and concept. Story itself was very boring and YA and annoying. Then I DNF'd The Invited. Is that what it's called? The Uninvited? I think it's called The Invited. And I listened to a lot of this just mindlessly for a while, which I think is the only reason I got as far as I did. And I think I made it to 70%, and I was like, oh, I don't have that much longer to listen to it, but I could not do it. It was so boring. It's basically like, I thought it was gonna be fun because it's like a ghost story, but it's more witches than ghosts, and I do not like witches. I do not like witches. I do not like Greek gods. Those are like two of my like, my brain shuts off and I have zero interest if I hear either of those things are in something. So yeah, I did not like this. And then I also DNF'd, but like might pick back up. I think I was just like not in the mood for it at the time. And that is The Lost World, which is the sequel to Jurassic Park. I've also heard this is not nearly as good as Jurassic Park, so maybe I just won't like it, but for now I put it down. I got like 20% in, and it was like, this is already not as good as Jurassic Park. I don't want to deal with it right now, so I put it down. I read a bunch of Doctor Who stuff. But yeah, that is everything that I read in the month of November. I will hopefully get, I think I might do an end of the year TBR rather than like December wrap up, just because why not? So I will talk about what I'll be reading next month, but spoiler, it will probably include several rereads. So yeah. I hope you all enjoyed this. Let me know what you all read this month and what was your favorite. Thank you all for watching, and I will see all of you guys next time.